You're listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast. That's right. Episode 28, Babak Anvari's Under the Shadow. Spooky Persians, Halloween in Iran.
Cha-cha-cha.
Spooky Persians, Halloween in Iran.
Cha-cha-cha.
The real monster is the Islamic government. That's the real monster, everyone living in fear. Spooky Halloween, Iranian Halloween, cha-cha-cha, da-la-la. It's my favorite time of year.
Also, it's Babak Anvari, I think. At least that's what his Wikipedia says. It's hard to read it, though.
Babak Anvari.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. That's what his Wikipedia says.
Spooky Halloween, Iranian.
Okay.
Are you excited about Halloween? Don't you love it? Don't you love watching horror movies every
Is this
day?
your audition for Danny Elfman?
Yeah.
Nightmare Before Christmas 2. Nightmare Before Nowruz.
I'm really hoping to get a role in Beetlejuice, or even if I'm lucky, Beetlejuice.
Do you think they'll do 4?
No, they'll probably stop at 3. Do you like Halloween? You are not answering my question.
Oh, I love Halloween. Halloween is my favorite North American holiday.
I was expecting you to say you hate it.
No, I love it. You get to dress up. You get to like make cool costumes. Candy. Candy's always great. Pumpkin patches, apple picking, apple bobbing, apple cider.
All right, we know you know what Halloween is. You don't have to convince the audience. One thing you do need to tell the audience is that you don't watch that many horror movies because you don't like them.
Yeah, I don't watch a lot of horror films. In my limited experience of watching horror films,
Films in general.
yeah, usually around halfway through horror movies, I find that characters start acting very illogically, often to like carry the movie forward. Because like,
I just feel like you've seen bad horror movies for the most part.
I don't know.
Dude, Bashoma Dustan Aziz, this is the Cinema Rex podcast where we discuss all things movies, Iranian movies, television, music, art, leisure, Halloween, Iranian scary stories about the jinn, Iran-Iraq war thematic troping of the umbrella themes that cover the basis of all of our perpetual nightmares and fears. Anything else?
No, I kind of just like listening to you listing off like 50 things.
I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi. Let me try that again.
No, we're keeping that version in. You are. And we are here to talk to you about Iranian movies. And because it's spooky Halloween season, this month we'll be doing 2 Iranian horror movies, even though everyone knows there are actually a total of 3 Iranian horror movies that have ever existed. That's right. Iranians don't make that many horror movies, and they hardly make any genre movies, and that's why films like this are a refreshing change of pace.
I mean, I will say I like that you said 3, because just in case there's like way more than 3, and we do 2, and people are like, you missed this, we can just tell everyone that was the 3rd one that Kaveh was alluding to.
Yeah, unless they mention 2 more.
Yeah.
Today we're doing Babak Anvari's Under the Shadow, the 2016 film. I think it was a British-produced film.
Yeah.
Certainly not an Iranian-produced film.
So, Babak, we're seeing a lot more of genre film, horror film that has influence from Iran, from the Persian area, really up and coming. Certainly a very big film in recent years has been A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which you've probably heard a lot with your film, although they're quite different. What do you think? Why do you think it's now that people are examining, filmmakers from this area of the world are making horror films, or there's more attention to these types of films, focusing on that part of the world?
That's a very interesting question. Basically, in Iran, there's a huge fan base for horror films, but Iranian filmmakers don't typically make horror films. It's not a popular genre for the filmmakers there to make. So I think it's just like in the case of Under the Shadow, and like I think Anna Lily Amanpour with Girl Walks On Alone at Night, it's just those Iranians who sort of like left Iran, because like there's like a huge Persian community since the revolution and war. Like a lot of Iranians like sort of migrated to various places in the world. So I think like here and there now you see like the sort of like second generation or third generation Iranians popping up, and then they want to sort of re-examine their sort of like history and background. And I can't speak for Anna Lily, but for me, obviously I was born in Iran and right in the middle of the Iran-Iraq War. And I think horror classically, a lot of time is about repression. And, use metaphors to sort of like address repression. And just thought like, that's a great setting for a horror film because it's 80s Iran was such a dark and intense time.
But let's just dive right into plot summary and then we'll talk about it.
Sick.
In the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, former medical student Shida tries to return to university but is barred by the dean. Shida returns home and learns her husband, a doctor, has been assigned to work in a war zone. She refuses to move to his parents' house with their daughter Dorsa. Shida prefers to stay in her apartment with Dorsa. Dorsa is afraid of demonic jinns and tells her mother that she's been told about jinns from her friend that lives downstairs. When a missile strikes their building, the neighbors decide to leave Tehran, but Shida stays in the apartment with Dorsa, who is increasingly becoming disturbed. Soon, Shida reads about jinns and finds that there's an evil entity in their apartment. Shida is in a race against time to rid the apartment of evil before the jinn living in the building completely consumes her young daughter. It has a certified fresh Rotten Tomato score of 99%. Certified fresh. And a 71% audience score. So Farhan, lover of all horror movies that you are, I will start with you and ask by asking you, what did you think of Under the Shadow?
I'm going to preface this by, again, clarifying. I typically don't like horror films. So if I give this anything above a D by the end, then it probably did a decent job at what it was trying to do. And tune in to find out what score I give it. But my initial reactions were, I really liked the way that they were like setting up the period piece for the most part, especially in the way that people were acting at the beginning of the movie. Very early on in the film, there's two characters having a conversation, and through the window, you see a missile in the distance like hit a part of the city. Mm-hmm. No one really reacts. There's like a tiny bit of a reaction, but not much, which is like pretty consistent with the stories that I heard from my parents about the Iran-Iraq War, that like years and years into it, like 5-6 years into it, you just get so accustomed to it, which is like messed up. And I'm sure that there's a lot to unpack there. Mm-hmm. I like that they did that. I like that there were like random checkpoints throughout the city. That's pretty accurate to what I've read and what I've heard about Iran within the first 10 years after the revolution. The vocabulary that they're using for the most part is like pretty accurate to what would have been said. And the reason I say this is because most of my exposure to Iranians growing up were Iranians who left during the 80s, right? So all the Farsi that I've been exposed to is Farsi from the 80s. It hasn't adopted more modern vernacular. You watch a movie like Layla's Brothers, and it's filled with modern vernacular, right? Modern vocabulary, modern slang. This movie didn't have any of that. And so all the language, the use of words and the way that they were speaking, I noted to myself that, oh, this sounds like the Farsi that I'm used to, and the Farsi from movies from like 1987 and earlier. With like minor exceptions, like at one point someone says data parking instead of like data garage and things like that. But yeah, pretty good for the most part in that sense. Once we get into the horror stuff of the film, some of it hit really well for me. Other things started to fall into lapse of logic, I found, for the story to be able to continue in this closed set. And for that, I was a little disappointed. And I was a little disappointed that like once she kind of agreed that it was a Jen and she says, oh, I'm looking for this book so I can read about it. I thought now we were going to get into some really interesting lore and she was going to find a way to fight back, et cetera, where you see in a lot of movies, like The Ring, I think does that really well, where she's like, on top of being a horror film, it turns into an investigation where she's also trying to figure out why did this happen? How did this happen? How do we fight it? How do we resolve it? And I felt like that was missing from the film.
That's an interesting point. I didn't even think about that. Well, speaking to the fact that it's accurate to its time and place, Babak does say in interviews that this was his reality, and he grew up in Iran during this Iran-Iraq War. So, I mean, I'll get more into it in the behind the scenes and trivia, but this is like it's almost an autobiographical film to a certain extent, because he talks about how his father was a war doctor, like a war zone doctor who was constantly being shipped away, and it was him. and his mother alone in the house. So he is essentially the Dorsa character in this. I think he might have said he had a sibling too. I don't remember. Has a sibling, I'm not sure. But I'm kind of in a different camp than you. This is my second time watching it, and I've actually shifted my opinion slightly from what I thought, but in a different way. I think he is a very competent director in terms of executing the horror. I think the third act, once the horror starts ramping up, I'm suddenly starting to really lean back into the genre and enjoy what he's done. The way he shoots some of the horror scenes, the way he cuts it, the way he edits and sort of the blocking around what the monster looks like and how you see it.
Yeah.
Really effective.
Yeah.
I think he does an excellent job.
I agree. I think that was all excellent.
For a first-time feature to do that as well as he did, like, hats off to him. He should be applauded because it's not even easy, and I think he's got a natural talent for it. I'd like to see him actually do more horrors. I think since then he's made one or two more features, and they're more like Hitchcockian thrillers. I would like to see him do another horror film. The one thing I kind of am hesitant to give much praise to is the social drama aspect of the story. Like, and a lot of it tying into the first third and even the middle third. He specifically talked about how he wanted the film to almost start off like the social drama about married life, family issues, that drama, and slowly bleed into horror. And he does that effectively. That is totally his intent, and he did it. One of my things, though, is if the social drama doesn't hit for me, a lot of that time is wasted time. I'm just waiting to get to the horror. And I couldn't remember. I was surprised on my second viewing how long it actually takes for anything scary to even happen. It's quite a long time. I think
it's
it's like the first
halfway through the movie.
halfway through the film. And again, that's his intention. But I don't think he does the social drama the way Asghar Farhadi does, or Kiarostami does, or even Panahi. It just wasn't hitting for me, the social drama aspect of it, as much.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to the writing. Like, I think that the film is directed very well. Most of my issues with the film have to do with some of the writing.
That's what it was. I realized this when I was writing my notes this morning. I heard in interviews that he talked about how it's a lot about the fear and like the weight down of repression, and how women are repressed in society, and how that repression feeds into a woman's psyche, and the way they feel trapped and afraid and anxious. How those are one of the main themes he was into, and I see that. But at the same time, I think there's like a thread about how she didn't live up to her mother's expectations. Yeah. Whether or not she wants to be a doctor or not was even put up to question. Her husband says, you only actually wanted to reapply for university after your mother died. Yeah. You could have done it like 5 years ago. You didn't. Then there's the idea of like coping with her loss in the mourning of her mother.
Her mom's photo falls over after the first couple of scary things. She picks it up, but then she puts it down.
But these themes are incongruous with the other themes.
Yes,
like they're not a universal theme. It's like it's almost like they're all snack size themes here and there. Yeah. That are they're not congruent with the rest of the theme. Like, I don't know what the main theme of this film is. And you can have multiple themes, but usually one or two will like surface at the top of like, is this about repression of women in Iran by the government? Is it by the societal values that are in place by you, by the society you live in? Yeah. Is it about her? There's constantly this line of like, oh, you don't think I can protect my daughter? And then when she like hears she hallucinates the phone call of the husband telling her you can't protect her. Like there's a ring there. Like, is it about being a parent? Is it about the feeling of abandonment by her husband? And I think the lack of clarity in that theme makes it less of a strong societal drama or social drama.
And see,
he's going to.
I think that if early, when she gets that book and she's like, oh, I want to investigate the jinn, and then there's no real like follow up on that. Yeah. If you followed that thread and you find out that, for example, her mom was a hardliner and her mom was abusive and all this stuff, then you can kind of tie everything back to the mom, right? Yeah. Like, you can tie every single thread back to the mom. You can be like, oh, the mom forced her to marry this guy. The mom tried to make her wear the hijab, which is why the jinn takes the shape of the hijab. Like, all this stuff, right? So, and I think that the best solution for something like this would have been if, let's say, there was a second writer involved in the film, right? A second writer can come in, read the script, and identify that, because they're coming into it with fresh eyes. They can be like, hey, you have a lot of really interesting themes here, but they're all kind of disconnected, and you have a lot of interesting points that you raise that don't really go anywhere. but we can find a vessel to tie it all together that fits into the main plot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you look at that's exactly it. Monster movies, and this is a monster movie because it has a djinn and it has a very cool, in my opinion, like hijabi floating kind of specter in the house. Monster movies always represent usually very powerfully a single and clear theme. Mm-hmm. In the Wolfman, like the werewolves, it's always the loss of control and the duality of man. In the xenomorphs and aliens, for instance, they represent the fear of the violation of bodily invasions, right? Mm-hmm. Dracula, it's like aristocratic privilege and sexual repression. Like Draculas are always representing sexual repression. Mm. Frankenstein's monsters, like the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition and playing God. Mm-hmm. What is the main thematic thread of this djinn in this movie? Which one was it? Was it the government? I like to think that it was because it's a hijab. It's a flying hijab.
Yeah.
It's a flying rusari.
Yeah.
But the aspects of how much the government is invading their life, specifically the Islamic government, mm-hmm. is like a minor thread. I can't tell if it's more about her regret at not becoming a doctor, the regret of her mother being let down by her now that she's passed away.
Yeah.
There's a shot she climbs up to the roof and she sees the book. And you think maybe it's going to be a book about the jinn or whatever, like you're suggesting, but it's like her scientific medical book and it's flapping in the pages, right?
Yeah.
And it goes to the front page of her mother's like signature, like to my dearest daughter, blah, blah, blah. That's supposed to be like, I don't know, is that your aha moment of like, oh, this is when it's all coming together?
Yeah.
Like this is the thing that's plaguing her fears.
Is the jinn her mom? Like what? Yeah.
Yeah. And exactly. And so, and like, because Dorsa does explain, the young girl at one point explains like the jinn is a woman. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, there's a woman in the house. She's telling me to come here and here, doesn't she?
Yeah. Says the old lady.
Yeah.
But then when Dorsa sees the jinn, it's the man that she couldn't save.
Oh, what you mean when...
Sorry, when Sheeta sees the jinn the first time, it's the man that she couldn't save.
I thought it was a different old man, but that's interesting.
I'm pretty sure it's the man she couldn't save, and he's naked and he runs away.
I like that scene. That scene was creepy.
I do too. I thought it was great.
And he gets sucked up into the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear that.
But jinn are known to shapeshift.
Yeah.
And I also it's cool that when they're like, oh yeah, jinn are shapeshifters, and their real essence is like shapeless and it rides on the wind.
Yeah.
I think it was cool to show it as like this head job. And if you notice also when she sees the photo of her mom, there's like a curtain behind the mom and the pattern on the curtain is the same pattern as the head job.
Oh, interesting.
But I think if you make the mom a hardliner, right? And in the photo, she's wearing a whole like hijab and chador or whatever that looks like it, then it ties it in even better. Like there's all these little things that with that one tweak, you can tie everything together.
I didn't notice the curtain was the same. You're like sure about that, eh?
I went back and I looked.
So that's interesting. So the ghost is her mother.
Maybe. I don't know.
Or using the idea of her mother to get with her head. Okay.
Maybe that. I think that's more likely.
It's a little bit of like, I think it could have been like tightened up a little bit or like gotten a little bit more focus to really resonate what it's trying to say. I think from my experience of talking to people, and we should mention for the record, I'm a huge horror fan. Contrasting to you, I love watching horror movies. I've seen just about every horror movie that exists. I mean, there's a bunch of like those like they've slapped together for like $50,000 the DS movies that exist and you've never heard. Like I don't watch those ones, but anything that's like actually a Hollywood film, I've seen. I've seen everything.
Like you've seen The Omen.
Oh yeah,
you've seen The Omen remake.
Yes. With Julia Stiles.
You've seen all the Exorcist films.
Yes. 1 and 3 are great. 2 is bad.
You've seen. I don't know. What am I missing here?
That's where the list ends for you.
Yeah. The Ring.
All the Universal horror movies.
The
all
Ring
the Child's
2.
Play.
You've seen.
Yes.
The Grudge.
Yes.
Did you see the Japanese version?
Yes. I've even seen The Ring versus Grudge.
Is The Ring versus Grudge?
Yeah.
The hell is that?
It's the monster from The Ring fights the monster from Grudge.
No, I understand the concept.
Well, then what else do you need
to know? Is it Japanese or was it American?
Japanese.
Okay. Hey, do you think the first Alien and the first Terminator are horrors?
The first...
Not the sequels, just the first ones.
Yes. Yeah, you're there.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I consider both of those movies horrors, and I think that they're both excellent movies.
Yeah.
And they're actually both my favorites in their respective franchises.
That's an interesting thing for me. I actually really like the first Alien way more than the second.
Yeah, me
Aliens.
too. Me too.
because I like the horror and I don't like when it turns into an action.
Yeah.
But I'm the inverse of the Terminator. I actually really like Terminator 1 a lot, but I like Terminator 2 as a better film. I like Judgment Day as an action movie more. I think that genre fits better as an action than it does a horror.
I think because I knew about Terminator as an action film,
Yeah.
or as an action series, because like I don't remember when Terminator 2 came out, but I remember when Terminator 3 came out.
1992.
I'm saying I did not have memories formed at the time that it came out. In fact, I'm pretty sure it came out a month before I was born.
1991, actually.
But I remember when Terminator 3 was coming out and all the advertisements around it, the merch, all this stuff, and seeing that, oh, it's an action film. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a Terminator. He's a good guy Terminator, and he fights a bad guy Terminator. And I had seen commercials of the second one. And then when the third one was coming out, I saw it was a war film, right? So then before Salvation came out, I went back to watch them all. And so when I watched the first one and Arnold Schwarzenegger shows up, I'm like, oh, great. He's like coming to protect this woman. And then he tries to murder her, and I'm like, "Oh my god, this is awesome!" Like it would like completely subverted my expectations.
Well, it did the
so it
reverse
had like the opposite of
effect.
like what Terminator 2
totally.
did, right?
That's funny.
So and the fact that it wasn't an action and that it was a horror, I was super into it. And I think they really solve the issue that I have with a lot of horror films, where it's the logic of like trying to keep this person who's being traumatized in one location. It completely
Terminator
loses
1.
that because they're constantly on the move.
Yeah.
Terminator 1. So that works for me because it's like, great, yeah, this area is compromised, so they move on. That works for me. And then the first Alien works in being confined to one space because you literally cannot go anywhere.
Yeah.
You're on a ship, right? So for that, it works really well too. But for this movie, there's so many times that I was watching this movie that I was like, you would leave.
Yeah.
Like if you weren't going to leave for the war, you're going to leave for the gin.
Yeah. That's the official slogan in Iran. Stay for the war, leave for the gin. Yeah, I mean, that's you know that qualm that you have about horror movies. This exemplifies that in stark contrast, or in true clarity.
Before we watched the movie, Mariam was asking,
Who's Mariam?
your wife.
Yeah, I mean, you have to tell the audience. You just randomly threw Mariam in there.
I think this was the first time Kava and I actually watched one of the movies for the podcast together.
Yeah.
I went over to Kava's house. We watched it with Kava.
Horrible experience.
We watched it with Kava and his wife Mariam. And before we watched it, Kava was explaining that he don't watch a lot of horror films, and I mentioned the lapse in logic thing, and she's like, "Well, what's like an example of something that would bother you?" And then I was like, "Let's say, for example, there's a child and they've like escaped the monster, and the child's like, I have to go back for my blankie." And like, there's no way in hell would a parent be like, "Oh, fine, let's go get your blankie." And then like this movie, we're watching it, and like 20 times the girl, like the whole premise as to why they're still in the house.
The second act plot point is because we can't leave until we find it.
Yeah, we can't find
Yeah,
it's a doll.
It hinges on that. Yeah.
And then even at the very end of the movie, like just as they're escaping, she's like, "Oh, my doll." And then she runs back down the stairs. I'm like, "No, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't buy it."
Behind the scenes in trivia. That was, by the way, Farhan doing a nitpick scene early, so I guess he's done his nitpicks for the episode.
No,
Behind
that's not
the
a
scenes
nitpick.
in-
That's part of my my reactions.
Behind the scenes in trivia. This was the official submission of the UK for Best Foreign Language Film for the Oscars for the 89th Academy Awards in 2017.
I was gonna say that.
Oh, would you like to say it now?
No, it's too late. Moment's gone.
Which I actually think is cool. To be honest, that's cool.
Why is that cool, Kaveh?
It's just the fact that it's an Iranian film made by an Iranian, and the country recognized it as a standout foreign language film and wanted to represent it as their UK foreign film. That's cool. That is a good thing. I like it.
I am a little upset that Britain's first Persian language submission to the Oscars was not directed by a white man, personally.
Well, maybe some other country will rectify that for you. This film was shot in Jordan, as a lot of films that want to take place in Iran typically do. At least foreign language films.
That's interesting.
A diasporic film. Which part of what I said is interesting?
That it was shot in Jordan. I don't think you needed to shoot this movie in Jordan.
You think they could have shot it in Iran?
No, I think you could have shot this movie anywhere. There's only like 2 exterior shots.
Well, he said at one point too that they were actually debating shooting this in studio in London, but they ended up shooting it in Jordan.
That's wild. I genuinely don't think you need to. I mean, maybe labor is cheaper in Jordan too. I don't know.
It is. Director Babak Anvari.
Yeah.
Director Babak Anvari's very first feature. And when he first approached a lot of producers for the film, the biggest note they got was, "Are you sure you want to make it in Farsi?" They wanted him to make an English language script. Like, take the same script and make it in English.
But it takes place in Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he stuck to his guns, and I commend him for that. Good job.
Yeah, me too. I think that this is also like, that's an old school way of doing movies. Like, you set it somewhere else, but you do it in English.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, we're living in a world, in a much smaller world where foreign language films become much more mainstream.
Yeah.
So I think you can do it a lot more now. So I wouldn't be surprised if his producers who recorded this were like 67 years old.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I don't even know if these are the producers that he ended up going with. I think this is just when he was shopping it around.
I'm gonna give a thanks to the TikTok generation as well for a lot of this, because they even watch.
Finally, they're getting recognition.
Yeah, they watch English language things with subtitles on constantly. So it's just become commonplace to have subtitles. So I think because of that, things like Squid Game ended up becoming mainstream.
As I mentioned earlier, this was based on his own experiences growing up in Tehran in the 80s during the war. And he described it as a silent war because Tehran wasn't the center. But every now and then you would hear bombs in the distance and people would quickly phone one another, like calling family members, like, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Okay." So like that was part of his lived experience in the 80s in Tehran. He said in interviews, Navid Negahban was the man who recommended the lead Nargis Rashidi to Babak. So if it wasn't for Navid.
Negahban, not Negahban.
Negahban. He also said that he was majorly, and this is the last for trivia, he was majorly influenced by what he called the Apartment series, which I'd never heard of it referred to as the Apartment series, but it's the three horror films by Roman Polanski, being the Tenant, Repulsion, and Rosemary's Baby. And of those three, Repulsion is by far my favorite, but they're all really great horror movies. That's it.
Oh wait, I have one BTS to just call out.
Oh yeah.
Throughout the film, you're constantly hearing sounds of wind building up as things get more and more intense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a reference to the fact that like jinn supposedly travel on wind.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're like watching it in surround sound, which we did at Kava's place, like you can hear wind even like building in the back.
Mm-hmm.
And then it slowly starts to get up to the front,
Mm-hmm.
and then it builds in the subwoofer. It was interesting.
Yeah, there's something about the wind too that we'll discuss in deeper analysis because I want to know your thoughts on it. Critical reactions. As I mentioned, 99% certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. Most directors would kill for that rating.
Were you surprised by that?
I mean, yeah. But also based on the way the Rotten Tomatoes works, it's like if 100% of the critics give it 3 out of 5 stars, that's 100%.
That's true. Because it's essentially what that means is what percentage of critics thought the movie worked versus what percentage thought the movie failed. It's like pass or fail.
Yeah.
So 100% or 99% means that everyone thought it was not bad. But when you look at the average score, it's an 8 out of 10.
Yes. Successful film, like good first film. And an audacious one too, to make your first film is a Farsi language period piece horror.
Yeah.
I applaud him for taking that risk and doing something different.
Yeah. Among top critics,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
30 out of 30 gave it fresh, and then out of all critics, 92 fresh, 1 rotten.
This was included among the 1001 movies you must see before you die, which was edited by Steven Schneider. And the UK critic Mark Kermode, who I actually really love watching his YouTube videos of film reviews. I think he's a great critic. He listed this as one of his favorite films released in the UK in 2016 and gave it 5 out of 5 stars.
Mm.
And he's he's a very thoughtful critic. Like he's not one that's known for being he doesn't give easy passes. Do you know what I mean? If he was a teacher, it'd be a hard marker.
Mm.
I really like his reviews. So that's a little cool tip of the hat from Mark Kermode.
Mm.
Deeper analysis. So other than the fact that like there is a little bit of all over the place with the theme, I guess, what Babak says about this film being about repression stands clear. Like the fact that the ghost, the jinn, is a floating hijab, floating rusari,
Mm-hmm.
is a clear nod to the fact that this repression that's being forced upon women in Iran is one of the things that's haunting her.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that like the deeper analysis really is this idea of the repression, censorship that's placed on Iranian women. I think there's elements that he could have really expanded on that. Like, I find it so fascinating that when she escapes the ghost outside, once she escapes the ghost inside and runs outside,
Yeah.
she's faced with the Basiji soldiers that are another threat, a very real threat that still exists to this day in Iran of women's rights. And I think there was an element of like, could she have seen a glimpse of that monster still within those soldiers? Or once she's being detained by them, is that manifestation of that monster still existing? But it goes away.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which thematically flies in the face of this idea that it's the repression that's placed on by the government.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, yeah, she's facing a whole new threat, which is an interesting take. And I like that scene because she's not even safe outside. But the manifestation of the ghost is gone.
And see, that would have actually made it interesting if when she's being held at the jail, if she sees it there too.
Yeah. And even stronger.
Yeah, because now she's like, oh, I can't escape this. We have to get the doll and we have to get the book. Like maybe when she's reading the thing about the jinn, it's like, no, you have to get it back. You have to do like a ritual to cleanse it, all this stuff. Because then it gives her an active mission to do and a logical reason to do it. And you can again tie that into the theme.
Yeah.
Because you can be like, oh, the jinn is actually more powerful around the circumstances of the Basiji and whatever. Because jinn also, like, the more stressed out you are and the more emotionally vulnerable you are, the more vulnerable you are to the jinn and the stronger the jinn are. Yeah. So I think it's an opportunity to explore that a little bit.
Yeah. And like, if she is dealing with all this unaddressed trauma with what's happening with the war, what's happening with her mother, what's happening with the decisions she's made and the regrets she has of the life not lived.
Yeah.
Then confronting that head on should be the solve.
Yeah.
Not running away from it.
Yeah.
There is this interesting, like, a big part of the discussion between her and her husband in the kitchen was this debate as to whether or not she's paying an ultimate price because she protested the Islamic regime. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. Because she was out in the streets as a university student protesting, she now can't get a work and she can't continue her studies. Mm-hmm. But her husband, who stayed out of the politics, is now rewarded with having a profession as a doctor. And that's a debate they have in the kitchen. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. He's like, didn't I tell you not to go out in the streets and protest? And how much you called me a coward for burying my nose in the books and not getting involved? Mm-hmm. And so that's also a very fascinating element of what could have been like this trauma, this repressed, unaddressed trauma that she exhibits, is that she fought for something she believes in and is now paying the price for it.
Yeah.
Whereas the people who put their nose in their books or put their head in the sand are being rewarded in 1980s Iran, right?
Yeah.
That's not really explored from a horror standpoint much either.
Yeah.
Imagine if, and I'm just coming with this on the fly, but imagine if the husband was in the house and he never sees the ghost.
Right.
He is incapable of witnessing the ghost.
Yeah.
Because for him, he's someone who buried his head in the sand and avoided it. That would be a really interesting thematic element to bring in too, if that's the angle you want to tackle.
Yeah.
Or men don't see the ghost at all and only women do, or something like that.
I mean, every time the girl wakes up when the dad's home, the dad goes and sees the girl. Mm-hmm. And like, it never really escalates when he's around. It's only after he leaves, and he insinuates to her repeatedly that like she can't take care of the daughter. And it almost seems like at one point there's like kind of a bit of an insinuation that maybe there was like a little bit of postpartum at some point.
Oh, interesting.
He mentions that she was never very good at showing interest or compassion towards the daughter before.
Right. And she does struggle with that a few times.
You can tie all of that back to the relationship with the mom.
Yeah, totally.
I commend the movie for laying the foundation for all these really interesting themes. I just wish that the film played with them more.
There's also, like as you're kind of just to add to what you're saying is she does feel quite distant at times early on with her daughter. Like before even the hauntings of the jinn, there's one night where the daughter wets her bed. Mm-hmm. And she's really quite disappointed. Rightfully so. Maybe she's a little bit too old for wetting her bed. But your child is living during a wartime Iran. Mm-hmm. Like bombs are going off. Mm-hmm. It's pretty manageable and understandable that your daughter might be suffering some stress and wetting the bed. But I felt like there was a little bit of a disconnect for empathy there.
Yeah. One
thing I really wanted to ask you about, and this would have been a great thing to have Mertosh on for, but the book, she's reading a book by Ghulam Hossein Sayeedi. Mm-hmm. I think the book's title was People of the Air, or that's a line from the book. She asks about that book from when she's visiting her neighbor's house. Ghulam Hussein Saidi wrote The Cow and the collection of short stories that The Cow was adapted from. So he's that writer. And one of the quotes that she reads in the book when she opens is, where there is fear and anxiety, the wind blows. Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
What do you think the thematic meaning of that is? Why that book? Why that writer? Why that quote?
Well, the thing with the thing with the air, that predates Saudi. That's like also in the Quran and in Islam, that they say that that's how jinn get around.
Okay.
That they travel on air. But then in other areas, the air is described as being more than a physical air. It's an ethereal air. And that stresses and anxieties build up that air, and it makes you vulnerable.
Okay, I guess that clarifies that to a certain extent. But does the book have horror elements? See, like, okay, this is the quote. Here's the exact quote. She picks up the book and by Ghulam Hussein Saidi and goes, "Do you know what it's about?" I'm reading exact quotes. Jinn. It's about superstitious beliefs in jinn. Down south and how they traveled on the wind. It's an anthropological book, not a book to find answers in.
Okay, so the people of the air. Saudi delves into the folk beliefs of the southern Iranian coastal people who traditionally hold strong beliefs in the existence and influence of jinn. The book explores the ways in which jinn are believed to possess individuals, cause illness, and affect people's lives in various ways, blending ethnography with fiction. Saadi spent time in these regions studying the local culture and beliefs, and he uses these insights to craft stories that reflect the mystical and complex relationship between humans and jinn. And then there's three major themes that the book apparently tackles. One is around jinn possession. One of the central themes in The People of the Air is the phenomenon of jinn possessions, where individuals, often women, are believed to be taken over by jinn. These stories explore how locals respond to these spiritual disturbances, often using rituals, exorcisms, and folk remedies to expel the jinn. The second one is cultural and supernatural dynamics. Saadi portrays how these supernatural beliefs, including everyday life, revealing the deep connections between folklore, culture, and social practices. Third one is mystical atmosphere. The stories are imbued with a mystical, almost surreal atmosphere, showcasing Saadi's ability to blend realism with supernatural elements. And it says that this work is a part of his broader literary exploration of the psychological and social struggles of the Iranian people, particularly the marginalized and the rural communities. By focusing on jinn, he taps into a key aspect of Iranian folklore and how it intersects with emotional and mental states of individuals.
That's fascinating. See, so it was kind of what I thought, was that the book is sort of a deep dive on jinn and the power, the mystical forces of jinn. So that's cool.
And that's why I was disappointed after that, because I was like, oh, cool. Okay, we're going to get her now playing around with, she's going to try to fight back.
Yeah. And like maybe have a little bit more of that book, searching that book for answers, or pulling a little bit more of the lore from that book into your story would have been really interesting.
And trying to like do an investigation of like, who is this jinn?
Yeah.
Who sent them? Who are they affiliated with? Why my daughter? Why me? Like all these things.
Cool. Is that it for deep brain analysis for you?
Oh, I have two more. I have two little ones. Sorry, I was just going through my list because you mentioned everything else that I wrote. One small one, and I feel like this one might be a coincidence, but one of the times when she wakes up to like a jinn nightmare, because she keeps, every time she goes to sleep, she has a nightmare that becomes more and more real. And then the last time it happens, you find out it's not a nightmare, it is real. But one of the times when she has this dream, the dream happens right at 3 a.m. And I looked up the association between the number 3 and jinn. And apparently a lot of the rituals that you do to fight off jinn, you do it 3 times.
Oh, okay, you're right.
But if that was done intentionally, I think it should have kind of been the opposite, because the number 3 should have a power against the jinn. Like it's supposed to ward off the jinn. But I don't know. I thought it was worth pointing out. The other thing I wanted to mention was that the family who is thought to like bring the jinn into the house, it's the nephew of the super wealthy and super religious and very superstitious family. So the fact that you have these like hardliner Islamic family who's very wealthy and clearly benefiting from the regime, they're kind of a little bit to blame for the jinn coming, I thought was probably done very intentionally.
How are they? Sorry, how are they to blame?
Because it's their nephew who he
Right.
he witnesses his family get torn to bits, right?
Right.
And then since then, he allegedly goes mute, with the exception of speaking to the kids.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Which I actually wouldn't be surprised if that kid is completely possessed by a jinn, or he's been consumed by a jinn and a jinn has taken his place.
Right. Yeah, that definitely has the feels of
Yeah.
there was something off with that kid.
Yeah. So it's that family, that super hardliner family, is the one that's kind of to blame for bringing the jinn into the building. And they're the ones who own the building. They're the ones who are super wealthy. Like when you go into their apartment, there's a stark difference between the wealth of their family and the wealth of everybody else in the building.
Yeah.
And I think it's commentary on like how certain types of people became very wealthy due to the revolution, and how these are also the same people who are bringing a lot of strife into the lives of others.
Yeah.
I feel like that was intentional. What are your thoughts?
No, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but there is that. He's clearly making one of the families more conservative and religious and wealthier. You can see their furniture is that gaudy, awful, freaking gold
Yeah.
chairs and yeah, that's a good point. That scene, my favorite scene, is a lot to do. There's a few handfuls I want to pick from, but all the stuff around the monster is great. That my top number one scene is when she looks out the peephole, sees the monster go left to right.
Mm-hmm.
She goes up the stairs.
Well,
outside.
she hears it knock first.
She hears it knock, yeah, goes up the stairs. But then when you see the thing floating there behind the door, and then it swiftly goes into the apartment and locks the door behind her, it's scary.
Yeah.
It's well done.
That was done really well.
The old man watching them sleeping and they get sucked into the ceiling.
That was really good too.
And also when the hijab ghost kind of gets bigger and becomes like a giant blanket and consumes them all and sort of takes them up underneath, and she's stuck underneath. This stuff was really well done and really effective. So I really want to commend all the ghostly scenes for being really well done.
Your favorite was the first one?
The first one about the door, because it's just so creepy. You just
no,
see
that
it
was really
floating
good. That was my runner-up. My favorite one was that first dream that she has, where the camera like
tilts,
rotates and turns, and then she sees that her daughter's like standing at the edge of her bed.
Yeah,
and it like scares her, and then she wakes up again.
Yeah,
and then you find out she was dreaming, and then the camera turns again.
Yeah.
And then this time when she looks, her daughter's not there.
Yeah.
But then she hears her daughter like banging on the door.
Yeah.
And she's like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And she runs over.
Yeah.
That was really well done.
Oh, that was really well done.
Good.
Damn, that's poetry. We discuss our favorite lines.
My favorite is, and it's like right near the beginning of the movie, it's when Sheeta is turned down from medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, "Well, you were political back in the day, blah, 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 blah." And then she says, "Back then, everyone was political. It was a revolution, right? I was young and impressionable, and I didn't even know the difference between left and right."
اما حاجی آقا موقع همه سیاسی بودم مگه انقلاب نبود خام بودم جوان بودم اصلا نمی‌دونستم چپ و راست یعنی چی
I thought that was so good because after the revolution, that's exactly what happened. Like the people who rose to the top got their cushy positions and suppressed everyone who was politically active to try to avoid anyone in those positions from getting to a position where they can influence power and overthrow them. Some of the first people that were executed obviously were the people who helped the Shah, but then the next group of people were the people who were within the Shah circle that turned on the Shah and helped the revolution. And then the next group after that were leaders of other political movements that helped the revolution happen.
That's really funny because my favorite quote is right around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the inverse of that to effect is when the husband says to her, "Have you forgotten that you kept calling me spineless for sticking to my studies?"
یادت رفته وقتی که بنده سرم انداخته بودم پایین درسمو میخوندم تو هم همش سرزنشم میکردی که بی غیرتی و این حرفا.
Which is the inverse of that is that it's just an interesting highlight of like he benefits from this fact. But I'm sure people were so tossed into like head and tail confused about how much to vocalize their, because I get the feeling that he isn't pro like Islamic regime. They're a married couple that probably agree on, but he wanted to stick to his studies because like you've committed all of this time in your life to your career.
Yeah.
And I just think it really paints a nice portrait of how difficult it was to know how much of yourself to identify and how much of yourself to allow to be seen
Mm-hmm.
because you wanted to continue living your life. The Islamic regime at the time was only like 3 or 4 years old, and you're trying to navigate your way through this unsure future.
Mm-hmm.
And by those people who were protesting, I'm sure committing to your studies and focusing on your future seems spineless to some because you're like, scary times, man.
Yeah.
Favorite performance?
What's yours?
Mine is Nargis Rashidi because I think she has a lot of emotional stuff to carry. She is in every scene in the movie, I think. And knowing that they shot this out of order, because I'd heard the interview, it's tough to like remember. Like if you didn't shoot this linear and you're just like, okay, today we're doing page 80, tomorrow we're doing page 20.
They would cover every movie's like that.
No, I know that. But specifically for the emotional stakes of this film starting as one genre, as a social genre.
Right.
And for her having to like slowly go crazier and crazier. And like that shift is like it's not easy.
Right.
To be like, okay, today you're in this headspace for this amount of trauma and fear over a ghost. Tomorrow, or like later on today, we're going to be shooting the scene where it's like, there's no ghost. You don't exist. It's societal drama. It's a social drama with your husband about politics. That's the thing that could be tricky to like maintain. I think she did a good job.
Fair. Okay.
But she does.
My favorite performance is actually Bobby Naderi, who plays the husband. He doesn't have very many scenes and he doesn't have a lot to work with.
Yeah.
But I think that he did it really well, and it just made me really interested to know more about his character.
Yeah.
So shout out to him.
Doesn't he look like Adam Carolla to you?
Yeah. Yeah. I can see
the
it.
length of the head. Okay, Festival of Cons, which is our new version of Nitpicks, where we talk about one con that we want to bring.
Oh, it's a festival.
CON.
Cons.
Where we talk about, this is a replacement of Nitpicks, Hot Takes, What Age Poorly, and also because we removed our least favorite scenes. I'll go first, and then I'll go to the washroom while you give your 20-minute parade.
We can take a washroom break, but you go first.
I just thought, like, I got really distracted. This is a weird thing for me to nitpick, but the lighting of the film. I remember thinking, like, I couldn't tell if it was shot in a soundstage or shot on location, but I felt that the film looked bright, a little too bright for a horror film. And I wonder how effective this film would have been if it had the same lighting or mood atmosphere as something like Holy Spider.
Yeah.
Which Holy Spider, I know we were like fair weather on, but man, the cinematography in Holy Spider is really great. The lighting is like atmospheric. It's lots of lights and shadows. And I feel like a film like this could have really benefited from a lot more shadows. It's called Under the Shadow.
Yeah.
And yet everything is lit like a soundstage. It's so bright in every room. At times you can't even tell what time of day it is.
Yeah.
Is it sunset? Is it sunrise? Is it midday? I mean, you could tell if it's night or day from like the way the outside was lit, but you know, you have different lighting in your house.
Yeah, the windows are always blown out. Every single window is like, if the camera's ever pointing in the direction of a window, it's just like a giant white light coming through that window. And
like, you know, you light your house differently based on what time of day it is. You have some lights off.
Yeah.
You have some lights on. This just always felt like the same temperature. And that usually doesn't bother me, but really stuck out for me this time. And that's my one and only nitpick. I mean, aside from the stuff that we've already discussed, we don't need to retread stuff that we've talked about already.
I will also say, like, to your point of the movie's called Under the Shadow, like even that sequence when the like head job turns into the giant sheet that she's like running through to save her daughter.
Yeah.
Like that sequence looked way too bright.
Yeah.
It almost took the scariness away from me because it felt like, you know, that game that you play in gym class where you like hold up the parachute and you run under the parachute to the other side.
Yeah.
Like it looked like that because of how brightly it was lit. But that same sequence, if it was really dark and she was running through it, I think would have made it so much more terrifying. And again, it's called Under the Shadow, and she's running. This is the sequence where she's running under the veil, but it was very bright. And yeah, so I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay, for me, obviously, logic issues. Again, that's something that I have trouble with a lot of horror films. Even at something as simple as like when the girl runs back in the room the first time when the air raid is happening, she's like, "Oh, I need to find Kimia. I need to find my doll. Like, where is she? Where is she?" And she's just like standing there and she's looking left and right and left and right and left and right, talking to her dad. And then she spots it and it's right there in front of her feet. And it's like, what? Why did, like, at the very least, like hide it behind like a bunch of stuffed animals or something. Like there was just things like that, or even story beats like running back to get it at the very end once you've already established like, little girl, this is like clearly, this is gone, the demon has possessed this. I had some issues with some of the production design. Like the use of masking tape on the windows. Like I understand you put tape on windows to help with cleanup in case a blast shatters the window. Masking tape will do nothing. And then again, using masking tape to like tape up the ceiling will do nothing. Like why didn't the production designer be like, hey, go get duct tape? Like, why are you using masking tape? What is this?
Mm-hmm.
They're eating toast for some reason instead of like literally any Iranian bread.
Mm-hmm.
Just overall, the production design in this film wasn't it for me.
Yeah, the thing about mentioned about the bread, totally. Like, why wasn't it sangak or bai?
Yeah. I've also brought this up before with casting children in roles. That actor was way too old for the role that she was supposed to be playing. And I think that if it was a younger actor who was obsessing over their doll, I might have been able to buy it a little more. But this was clearly like an 8 or 9-year-old kid playing like a 3 or 4-year-old.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's mostly it.
Cool. Double feature lineup. I have a great one, so I'll go second.
Mine is The Omen. It's another movie with a creepy, scary kid. Just have 2 movies back to back with like creepy kids and like creepy things having to do with kids. Creepy kid night. What's yours?
Okay. Mine is The Babadook, because this feels very much like these 2 films could have been like siblings or covers of each other. Because The Babadook is a story about a woman who, after the loss of her husband, is now stuck raising her son alone, who's about the same age as this girl in this film. And one night after reading her son a bedtime story about a Babadook, she starts seeing the Babadook in the house. And it is very much clearly a story about grief and depression. Because the Babadook is a manifestation of a mother's unprocessed grief and emotional trauma following the loss of her partner. And it's the whole idea of the Babadook is that this monster can't be defeated. It has to be accepted and managed. It's like reflecting on the nature of grief. That you can't defeat it. You have to learn to live with it or like manage it. Very similar to this. I think some of those same themes of grief and loss and trauma are right there. And monster in the house that might be a manifestation of the woman's internal trauma is right there. Also, just fun fact, the Babadook has been now accepted by the queer community as a queer monster because even though it's hardly identifiable, the Babadook is mostly shadows. At one time on Netflix was accidentally placed in the queer LGBT genre. So Netflix was like, hey, check out these great queer LGBT movies. And the Babadook was on it, despite the fact there's nothing about it thematically about queer elements or LGBT elements. And then when that happened, the queer community was like, sweet, we adopt Babadook as one of our own. And ever since then, there's been like this online internet thing of like
That's
the Babadook
so funny.
is a gay ghost because
you know what's funny? As you were saying this about like as you were like describing the Babadook, I was like scrolling through photos from the film on like Google Images because I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
And then like just as you said, it's been adopted by the gay community. I like right then a photo of like the Babadook with a rainbow behind it popped up. I was like, what?
The Babadook is a gay icon.
That's really funny.
Which I love. That's good.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard from many people they've credited this as being the scariest movie they've ever seen.
I've heard that. I don't agree. But it's good. It's well done. Very well done. The Babadook itself is very creepy.
Oh, there's a Babadook 2?
Coming out. It's not out yet.
Babadook?
Jennifer Kent's second film is one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in my life, which is not a horror, but it's like about the Australian mistreatment of its indigenous people.
Oh.
Essentially. And it's a revenge story.
I heard about this.
Called The Nightingale. It's fucking horrifying, but a great movie. Like a masterpiece. Like I cried when I watched it.
I think you've mentioned this on the podcast before.
I did. I have. When I talked about it, some other traumatic film we watched.
Is she indigenous?
I don't know. I don't want to say yes or no. I don't think so, but maybe. I think she's a white Australian. But she's calling out her government's past atrocities. Like it's one of the angriest films. Oh, I know when I talked about when we talked about Rasulov. Because Rasulov's vibes remind me of Jennifer Kent.
Oh, interesting.
Calling out their government.
Interesting.
Can this be a modern Hollywood remake? I say no because this is modern enough. This came out in 2016 and it's as modern as it can get. This is a modern Hollywood film. I mean, it's a British film, but...
I mean, unless Iran and Israel go to war, then you could remake it and set it today.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Fun movie. And no for you as well?
Yeah, same.
Final thoughts and grades. Go ahead, Farn.
I think if you're a fan of the horror genre, you'll really enjoy this movie. if you're somebody like me who already has some issues with the horror genre, you'll likely give this a passing grade, but it definitely has some of the same problems that I have with other horror films, namely that there's leaps in logic in order to get the story to continue going. The scary scenes are done very well. I think the directing is a strong point in the film. The acting is pretty decent. Oh, the music is also very good. I think the weak points for me have more to do with some of the cinematography, like you said, is a little too bright. Sometimes it's a bit too flat. The production design at times feels a little off. Like even some of the stickers in the background are like contemporary stickers, but it's like set in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the writing, I think also there's a lot of themes that are planted well, but I don't think they're explored as well as I would have liked, and they're not tied together too nicely. And finally, I have an issue with the ending. I think that there's this reveal that part of the doll was left behind and that the book was left behind. I would have loved if the very last shot in the film was like all of a sudden this like jinn or a smoke or a wind or something like hits the front of the car and then the car crashes and then the movie ends. Like I would have loved if they like revealed they left the thing behind. You thought they were safe. Guess what? They're dead.
It floats back onto their screen or something. The hijabi ghost.
Yeah.
Floats
Or
out,
it's
hits
like
their window.
Or it's like you see that it's like caught on the bumper of the car or something.
Yeah.
A lot of times in horror movies, I don't like when they do that. When they're like, oh, they escaped. And then you reveal that, psych, they didn't escape. This movie, I think, actually had way more going for it to be able to make that argument. And I think that they could have. Whereas sometimes when horror movies do it, it's like, well, they did the rituals they had to do to exorcise the ghost. They should have gotten away. This is against the logic established within the movie itself. Whereas here, we've established that the jinn still has those things. So the jinn could mess them up.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, my final grade for the movie is a C.
Mm-hmm.
And just to clarify, a C is not a terrible grade in our metric. It's like a 6.5 out of 10, essentially. So still passing, and it's definitely faring above average for horror movies in my books.
That's cool. Fair enough. If I was going to be rating it on societal drama, I would probably give it a C plus or B minus. If I was getting rated on its horror, I'd probably give it a B plus or A minus. So in the splitting it, everything being even and splitting it down the middle, I'd give this a B or B plus. I'm trying to think. I'll give this a B.
Okay, that means that the Cinema Rex average score for Under the Shadow is B minus minus.
Under the Shadow demands that we feel history as much as intellectually acknowledge it. Its important lessons cannot be taught through dates and names, but through something far more visceral, intoxicating, and memorable. The genius of Under the Shadow lies in the way it builds up the tension, slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first starting as a social drama, and then creeping into your head as a horror, indistinct at first until it's too late, and you're immersed in a story about a jinn. Much like in The Babadook, first-time director Babak Anvari allows the question of the supernatural to orbit the drama of Under the Shadow, which elevates the horror and brings into question larger themes, something I wish more Iranian filmmakers would do. I give praise to filmmakers such as Babak Anvari and Ana Lili Amanpour for ushering a new wave of Iranian films and exploring genre in a way that is as astounding as it is refreshing. Farhan, thank you very much for joining me in this discussion of Under the Shadow.
Thank you, Kaveh.
You know how I feel about you.
Unfortunately.
To our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Please like and subscribe and follow us on the socials.
And leave a review.
And review. 5-star review. Be omid didar, my friends. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.